Thanks everyone for coming today. I'm Johanna Reynolds, and some of you have me for Music Appreciation, but I've kind of taken it on as a pursuit in my own career to highlight women in the arts, specifically in music. And Maria and I were chatting about a few things, and I just thought maybe it would be really interesting for you as students and for us as faculty to kind of organize a conversation about women in the arts and how very often they're underrepresented, certainly in the music history portion. And so thanks for coming. We're excited to have everybody. So we've got Elaine over here, who's the artist on the left. Maria Gillard's in the middle, and Carrie Ripley is right here. And so basically what they're going to do is just kind of introduce themselves to you and kind of showcase what they do, and then we'll kind of start talking. So I'm not sure who wants to go first.
I've been volunteered. That's okay. I'm the odd man out today, so it only stands to reason. I'm Elaine Verstraete, and although I do play some music and dabble in it, I'm primarily a visual artist, and thank you for including me. I have been artist, illustrator and freelancer for 30 years and counting, and I'm a little dismayed to think that actually I'm becoming more and more of a member of history as the years go by. But I went to Syracuse University, got my degree in visual and performing arts, and then I started freelancing, worked for one company for about a year, and then decided I wanted to be an independent contractor, and things just kind of rolled along from there. I would say, as I do my introduction, I wouldn't mind interlacing the Women Association in my education, and I really, as I gave it thought, I really feel that I had a lot of female influence in my education, as all my art teachers were female, and I had a number of instructors when I went to Syracuse University, and I brought a couple of examples of them. This is Kathy Calderwood's work, and she's the one that introduced me to something called a trompe-l'oeil, and that means fool the eye in French. And another is Dagmar Frenta. This I also am dismayed to admit that when I looked for her example online, that it was listed as a vintage book cover, so that's anyway. But I thought it was timeless, and it does carry over really into some of today's work. I think it's timeless. I see a lot of the digital art that looks familiar to this. After I graduated Syracuse, I started working as a graphic designer, and started my own business. I had an office space up in Rochester, and I started doing a number of works. I guess Wegmans would be the most notable. They were my client for many years, illustrated a lot of their products, and that was very fun. It was my bread and butter work. From there, I got into children's books, and this is probably the most successful children's book that I did, called The Star of Christmas, and that took me 2 years to produce, so that was a major endeavor. I also did a number of other book historical biography type productions that really required a lot of self-education. I had to learn a lot before I could actually create the illustration. And then to round out the experience, I have done a lot of event poster art. So I guess overall, I've had a long career, and it's ebbed and flowed through many phases throughout these 30 years, and we can talk more about that as the conversation continues. Thanks.
Wow. Okay, well, I'm Maria Gillard, for those of you, some of you know me and some of you don't. I went to Potsdam School of Music, the Crane School of Music. That's where I was educated. I have a bachelor's degree, and worked as a public school music teacher for 3 years, and as in primary school. So everyone was under 8 years old, and I did that for only 3 years because it was the Canandaigua Primary School, and there were 1,000 children under 8 years old, and I was the only music teacher, and I was only 23, and so I was just kind of like, I don't think I can do this. Started dreaming this old man and little rabbit foo-foo at night. I thought, I gotta change my career. So I did a lot of different jobs. When I did quit that job, I just started my own little business teaching guitar lessons. And I mostly did that with children. And I did that for 2 years. Then I went and worked for a modern dance company at the University of Rochester as a mandolinist. And my pay was to be able to take modern dance classes. So as I took modern dance classes, I did a lot of that in college. They worked me into the dance company, and that dance teacher choreographer happened to like musical theater and composers that composed for musical theater. So she combined musical theater and modern dance together. So then I became one of the singers in the dance company. And I did that for 2 years while having lots of odd jobs. All through this period of time, I continued to take voice lessons. That's what I was a major in college, was voice. And I ended up taking lessons from the same woman for 25 years. Because when I started my job in the primary school, I lost my voice 3 times between February and June, because I was hired in February and I just didn't know what to do. So I found this voice teacher and I ended up studying with her for 25 years, which is how I got this job, because she used to be the voice teacher here. So I was very fortunate. I learned everything she knew, and I really learned more about singing from her than I did in my 4 years of college, I would have to say. So in that whole time when I had a lot of odd jobs, I worked for a movie theater, an arts theater in Rochester, the Little Theater. I worked there for 4 years, and then I worked for Borders Books and Music in the music department, which is like Barnes and Noble, but Borders is now no longer a business, but it was. And so I started learning a lot about the music business. And at that time, before that, actually, I started writing songs because I was really into folk music. I learned how to play the guitar. I love to play music. So so that sort of all worked together. And then I started learning a lot about the music business through working in a music store. And just learning how merchandise came in and out and how record companies worked, and just a lot of things, who was in charge, who was not in charge. So that was very valuable. And then I was offered a position here as a voice teacher and a guitar teacher, so that's how I ended up here. And I quit my job at Borders. But I lived this double life for all this time, because I have regular jobs, but I also pursued my music. I did a lot of touring in the 90s, just mostly around New York State and New England, but I did a little bit around the Washington, D.C. area, and then some in the West, like Texas, New Mexico, Colorado. So all that time kind of learning about songwriting and performing and what that all takes. And that's me up to here. Should I sing a song now, or should I wait? Yeah, I'd sing a song. So I thought this is just a short song that I wrote. And I thought I would sing this song because it's called Steady Woman. And since we're doing this stuff about women. And where this song came from was I was witnessing, do people know who Ani DeFranco is?
Yes.
Famous woman who started her own record company outside of in Buffalo. She was from Buffalo, And now she lives in Nashville, I think, or New Orleans. New Orleans.
Yeah.
She lives in New Orleans. But she was a real go-getter, and I saw her on stage. She's smaller than me, and she just lit up the room, and I was like, wow. So I was all by myself watching this concert, so I just started describing what I was experiencing in her. So that's where this came from. I guess I'm going to stand up. So it's a pretty short song. She lives in the now, her fingers are skinny. She doesn't mind what they think. She's got a big loud voice. She's kind of pretty, cranberry juice is her drink. She's hip and happy, has eccentric hair and a big fat grin, makes everybody stare. She's like a lion, wild and ready. She growls like a bear. Steady woman, steady woman. Well, she'll open all of your doors, lay her heart on the table right next to yours. She's the one, she's the one, she's the one you've been looking for. She says what she means every word. Well, she's never quick to blame. Got to make a difference, so headstrong she won't play the game. But she sees the world in black and white, and she's like a burning light of love, genuine love. Steady woman, well, she'll open all of your doors, lay her heart on the table right next to yours. She's the one, she's the one, she's the one you've been looking for. A little reckless, a little righteous, but she's got better things to do than fight. She have you dancing right on the ceiling, yeah. She'll stick around all night. Steady woman, well, she'll open all of your doors, lay her heart on the table right next to yours. She's the one, she's the one, she's the one you've been looking for. She's the one, she's the one, she's the one you've been looking for. Oh, thank you.
I don't know how I can follow that up. My name is Carrie Ripley. I work here at the college full-time. I'm a technical specialist, and I also teach some audio-related stuff. I teach audio for film and video gaming, which is a pretty comprehensive class. I also taught a music notation class at one point. Comes in and out. But I am somebody who's always been obsessed with music since I was a kid. Michael Jackson's Thriller came out when I was very small, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be a part of that, because it was such a huge phenomenon at the time. When I was 8, my parents bought me a little Casio keyboard, and it had a little sampler in it. So I spent most of my childhood locked in my bedroom, making little mixtapes and sampling sound effects, making them into songs, or sampling pieces of other songs and making them into songs. So I spent a lot of time doing that. When it came time to go to college, there weren't a lot of options as far as music recording and audio production went. So what I ended up doing was going to school I wanted to do something related, so it had to be media related, even if I couldn't go to school for music production. And that was just because it wasn't easy to find schools that had that option. So I ended up starting out in TV and radio production, worked on some local TV stuff. I got offered a job at a local news station, and I said no way, because that seems terrible, right? It's the high pressure situation of the news happening at that moment. And I went in to do an internship and I saw people getting screamed at for things not happening precisely then, and I don't like that high pressure situation, so I said, forget that. So I went to college for film production. So I kind of came from that side of things with the film and TV stuff. I went to LA for a little while and I worked on productions for NBC, HBO, Disney, a lot of different companies, TV shows, and some film stuff and some internet productions too. So I was able to have that background. When I came back from LA, I wasn't really doing much as far as keeping in the industry and keeping contacts up. So I decided it was finally time to go back to school for music production, and then I found FLCC, so I'm an alumni of the program here, the music recording program, and now I work here full time, so I was fortunate enough to do that. So I have, coming from the film and TV side, I've worked in that respect, worked on audio for that stuff. Since I've gotten the degree here about 10 years ago and started working in music, I've worked on lots of different music productions. I scored a documentary about bullying a few years ago, and I've recently been starting to get into video game sound and music. So I brought kind of like a 3-minute demo that I just put together when I was working on some class stuff, just to show you a little bit as far as sound effects, ambiances, that kind of stuff. And Johanna does some lovely voiceover work in this, voiceover acting in this one too. Could you go to the first slide? So I can check for the one on the right? Yep.
Hello and welcome, Mr. Alexander. I see you've met a few of my friends. I have many more. I am very popular.
Who? What?
This is Felix. He's going to kill you. Oh, Felix. He was like a son. Working in the private sector now. I guess the military wouldn't take you back after what you did.
Hawthorne, come in. The tech is alive. I need backup.
It's no use. Communications blocked.
Sorry, I got a little gruesome at the end there. the unique challenges. One of the unique challenges about designing sound and music for games is that most of the sound and music are tied to events. So it's not like working on a film where everything is linear. And you've already got the piece of film edited and you're just basically plugging in music and sound. For games, a lot of times you have to think about the character placement and how the sound is going to relate depending on where it is in the space around the character. And also, as far as music goes, you have to work a lot with looping. So you write short pieces of music, and they have to have continuity between the short pieces, and they also have to have variety, because when people are putting 30 or 40 minutes into a game, you don't want to be completely sick of the music. If anybody remembers like 80s video games, if any of you guys have played retro games and stuff, you know it's like one short clip over and over and over again, and it drives you insane, right? But these days, you might have a full orchestral score, but instead of just writing, a 40-hour piece of music, you're writing shorter pieces, and they're kind of blending together and looping and interacting. So it's definitely a different world. So that's me.
So I want to just give you, I'm not going to talk about myself very much, but I just want to give you kind of an insight into why I thought this was so important. So I am also an alumni from here, and then I went on to get a bachelor's in music, and then I went on to get a master's in music composition. And in my time, in my grad program, I realized that there was this kind of disparity between how many women composers I was studying shoulder to shoulder with and how many I had learned about in my education. And in a formal setting, and I think we've talked about this, I know, I'm not sure, Elaine, if you have felt this, but I know, and I've asked a lot of my students, how many female composers did you learn about in elementary school in your first exposure to music, in your first exposure to the creative world? How many female composers did you learn about? And very often the answer is, well, maybe not any. And then, if we really kind of rack our brains, we can come up with some. Clara Schumann, because she played her husband's music, and Fanny Mendelssohn, because she played her brother's music, And there are a couple of names. And in the textbook that we use for our music appreciation class here, there's a 700-year gap between mention of female composers, and I'm sure, Kathy, you see this a lot in music history. And so one of the things that I'm kind of actively trying to do in how I teach is I'm trying to write kind of a partner text so that I can eventually write my own textbook that we can use, but that fills in the gaps of female composers, because there are some there. You have to dig for them. And so although we can't change history, we can't change how things were and how easy it is to find information about female artists and composers, we can document what's happening now. And so that's part of this process for me is in the last year I've interviewed about 15 of my contemporary colleagues who are creating music actively in whatever in their circle. Some are jazz musicians, some are film scores, some are do all sorts of things, electronic music and experimental music. And so I'm trying to document what is happening now so that 100 years from now or 200 years from now, there is absolutely no shortage of information for us to find about women in the arts. So I just wanted to kind of give you all, a lot of you who have had me as a student kind of already know that's why I'm doing this, but for those of you who don't have me, I just wanted to kind of explain that. Because I find that if I don't change how I teach it, the next generation isn't going to know any more than I do. And so for me, I have to learn more, and I have to dig a little harder. So that's kind of the background in this. So maybe the best way to kind of to segue is if any of you want to talk about who your biggest inspirations were in the field of arts, and kind of what made you want to do what it is you do now.
To sing, I was a fairly good singer by the time I was 10. So, I could carry a tune, and my grandfather made me sing in front of the whole family and things like that. So I had some confidence in that area, so it made me want to wanted to pursue that and find out more about that kind of thing. And then the 60s happened, and there were lots of women who were playing guitar and singing. So, I mean, that was my main influence. It's very different from the whole, although a lot of those people were in the mainstream of music. That music was played on the radio. It wasn't like then, once the 70s and 80s came, that was like, well, we're done with that. We're going to go into disco and pop music, and then Madonna got really popular, and then the whole shift of the entertainment industry shifted. It changed that. I guess that's what I meant.
I think that's an interesting point, though. Maria, coming from an artist perspective, we're used to seeing kind of these strong, powerful women as musical artists or as pop artists, right? But then behind the scenes, it's almost all men
That's
producing
true.
and releasing that stuff.
Exactly.
It's kind of an interesting perspective, because even these female empowerment anthems they're coming out with, some of them are even written by men.
I know,
And
but
that's
it's
still,
true.
and that's very much true today.
Yeah.
Very much.
It's
yeah.
very true. Yeah. Yeah.
So Elaine, do you feel that in visual art, is this a similar thread that women are kind of underrepresented in in your studies?
Definitely in my studies. I think the actual experience I had with women, like I mentioned earlier, that they were very present,
Yeah.
right from little to current. And there were just very few. I brought a few examples, but people that everyone knows that you couldn't help but be inspired by, like Georgia O'Keeffe or Beatrix Potter. When you're a kid, the most exposure you have to visual arts is children's books. That's the first thing that you get, and that's your biggest learning tool. So I suppose that was my first draw, no pun intended, to wanting to be a visual artist, was just all these wonderful pieces of communication, these wordless communications that were coming my way. And so when I was sent to my room, which happened once in a while, I was always very happy. That was my place to go, where I made good use of that time. I wrote stories, I sang songs, and I drew pictures. So I found myself just attracted to the idea of it in my own little world. That's what I chose to do, given the option. My biggest influence, brought a picture of my mom. How many people can say that? Maybe a lot of us. She was a very unique person. She was stylish. She was strong-minded. She could draw. So when I was very little, I would watch my mother draw these beautiful fashion illustrations, and at the time, that was, if you remember, if you hear your grandparents talk about Sibley's and the newspapers. That's how advertisement happened. It was mostly drawing. Photography was some, but illustration was very desirable. She wanted to be a fashion illustrator. Instead, she became a parent, and then she became a single parent. So my influence was powerful. This strong female example of what a woman is, right from very little. She sewed all of these dresses. She was a sewer, she was a doer, she was a realtor. She was one of the first female realtors in Rochester and was written up as such. So I daily and yearly, as the years went on, and watched her become a single parent. In fact, even it says here, it's surprising how quickly a home of your own minus furniture can drive a thusly motivated housewife and mother into the job market. She didn't get to go into the arts, but she was incredibly inspiring as an artist. And then she showed me the power of being an independent breadwinner and creative person who built a life. And to me, that was huge. And I think I tended to, and I still do, tend to drive my life a little bit with blinders on, and that helps me to escape fears and doubt and questions. But since then, as I've grown older, I've become much more appreciative of being aware of other people, their successes, and what they can teach me, and also history. I think as we get older, we appreciate what's happened before us.
So let me ask you kind of a twofold question. So what are your goals kind of personally in your art? Like, what is it that you try to create when you create something as artists? Because all three of you are artists, but you're also all three educators. So where do they combine? I'm assuming they probably combine often, but do you have different goals as an educator than you do as an artist?
I think for me, they do combine. Personally, as an artist, I'm kind of always seeking out new things to try, a new thread to work in, a new road to go down. I want to try, this type of audio production or this type of music, learn a new piece of software, learn a new plugin. I'm always trying to expand my personal knowledge and my personal creativity. I think that overflows into educating because I think that I can come from having a perspective of working in TV and film and audio production and music and video gaming. I think that I can help students maybe kind of find an avenue that they're interested in that maybe they didn't think about before. So that's really important to me. Maybe you come into my class and you know a little bit about some of the stuff I'm talking about as far as film or video game production, but you're not really sure how it all works. And then maybe when you leave the class, you either have a stronger interest in something or you've kind of tapped into something that you weren't sure or you didn't know was there before. So I think it all kind of ties together for me.
It totally does. I think I failed to mention that in my introduction that I also have taught for 10 years. I taught at RIT for 6 and here actually for 3 or 4. I've lost count. I'm not here currently, but so I came into teaching as a secondary experience, and I never pictured myself being a teacher, just being autonomous, working at home. And I found it to be one of the most wonderful experiences of my life, and I'm sure most every teacher, says that, hopefully, and agrees with that. And I think what is so wonderful about it is that every classroom has its own personality. Every grouping of people has its sort of collective consciousness that you experience unique to that class. You can even have the same students in a different class and combining with different collection of people, the way you bounce your ideas off of each other is very unique. And I've had some classes that have been so special in what we did when we got into the same room together, bouncing ideas off of each other. And that, I guess, would be, I would say the biggest thing I've appreciated and tried to promote is that exchange of ideas and that energy, that special thing that happens between people that is almost intangible, that you walk away from that was unique from that particular class. And then I hope to find if there are stumbling blocks or some reason why the experience isn't going well for an individual, is to creatively problem solve and try to figure out what is the magic dust that will spark inspiration. Because the whole reason I got into this living is because I wanted to enjoy every day and feel passion. So to me, if I can inspire somebody else to feel that passion, that wanting to get up and take on a creative task, then I feel successful.
Well, for me, one of my goals as an educator is, because I give private voice lessons and I do this at home as well, one of my goals is always to help people find their own voice in a very deep way, deeply in their body and deeply in their heart, because that's where I think all the creative ideas and nurturing comes from. Is that if you go inside and find what you really love, it's going to come out and even as musicians, if you're a piano player or a guitar player, saxophone player, it's going to come out through the instrument. And I find it difficult sometimes. Well, first of all, by teaching it, I feel like I've actually become a better singer and I stay in better shape. Just like if you were a coach, you would be, running every day with your team or whatever. It helps me to stay current with my own art and my own singing. But I find that what's difficult educating in singing is that there's so much hype on television with The Voice and American Idol and all that stuff, and so that's promoted, which isn't bad. It's not bad stuff. It's just I have a hard time with it when there are students that come in and say, I'm going to try out for The Voice, and this is what I'm going to do. And then they try to sing, and they can hardly even sing a scale. So, and they have no breathing, no nothing. So then my goal is, okay, well, if you want to be on The Voice, here's where you have to start. And so then we start there, and then their whole attitude changes. So to me, that feels like I'm really contributing something, teaching something that an individual can learn about themselves in order to meet their own goals. And in turn, it helps my own artistry because then I say, okay, well, I could write a song about that. Anyway, so I mean,
Well, if I can add to that, because creating art, doing both, I can see the overlap. And Johnny Mitchell is also a painter, and there are many musicians that are artists, visual artists, and vice versa. But I think that what I felt when you were speaking was that it's so about trying to be in this moment. And when you're projecting a result, like The Voice, into your current experience instead of just being present. And it's the same with a drawing. I don't know if anyone in here actually does visual art, but it's probably the same with music. When you're so busy thinking about product, it's hard to just be in that timeless zone, they call it the zone, the creative zone, where, and I feel it when I'm making my drawings and paintings, it shows in a line. These brush strokes, it's like a direct conduit to your emotional state. So if you're laying down a line and you're feeling anxious, or thinking, oh, this has got to come out, if it doesn't come out, I'm going to fail, and I won't get paid, and I'll miss my deadline, then the line's going to look crappy. But if I'm just in the moment, and I'm literally, it sounds corny, but if I'm feeling love and connection towards what I'm actually doing right now, then the line is beautiful. And if I can stay there, and that's a lot of pressure sometimes, but if you can just stay there, and really what it is just being present. And the more you can be present, and I'm sure it's the same with singing, with playing an instrument.
Do you feel like so much of society is now instant gratification? It's all about instant gratification, and everything in the arts is about delayed gratification.
yes, I feel that way. Yes.
I mean, especially like in a voice lesson setting, right? Like they want to be on Voice or on TV tomorrow, and
yes.
I mean, it's like everything's delayed gratification. Right? In the arts, I don't feel as, except for maybe when you finally get to a concert, or maybe you have a gallery showing and you can finally like say, oh, all of this is done, and then you get the rush. But I know for me as an artist, when I'm writing songs, I'm writing for months and months and months before I release a project. And it's, hours and hours of practicing and refining lyrics and all of that stuff. And then, yes, I put on a show that's an hour long, and that's where I finally get that gratification. But I feel like as an educator, I'm often reminded that I'm fighting against a society that is all about instant gratification, and I have to kind of bring students like down, like, no, this isn't going to happen overnight. Do you feel it that same way?
Oh, definitely. I do. I mean, now, it used to be that you would maybe want to work for a record company someday, and, so you would look around for internships and apprenticeships and make connections and networking. And now you can take a laptop and an interface and make your own album and release it independently, So there's the instant gratification right there. So then it's hard to convince students you need these skills, you need to learn the physics, you need to know what's happening behind the scenes when they could just take a laptop, throw something on SoundCloud, everybody can download it, that easily.
All right, so I'm gonna ask you what was your biggest roadblock? What was your biggest kind of creative hurdle that you had to cross? Kind of just in your personal line of getting to where you are now. Do you have one?
I think for me it was judgment of others for where you were starting. When I first started writing songs, I tried to, I would write them and then I'd show my friends and all my friends would say, oh, that's good, keep doing it. But then you get out in public and try to go to an open mic or something like that. And people would just come up and say random things without you being asked. Like, that song was too slow. You sang that too slow. Or, what? Are you trying to kill us with your emotions? I mean, that was so deep. I'm like, and then I took it on. I mean, being young, I took it on and it's like, well, I'll never write again, or I'll put things under the bed. So, and that was one of my biggest things until I just said, you know what, I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm just going to write what I feel is important to write about.
Yeah.
And if they don't like it, they don't have to come. They don't have to come to open mic. Or whatever, or a show or whatever. So that was one of my biggest.
I think it's hard as a singer-songwriter, right? Because it's not like you're just writing a song and giving it to somebody else and somebody else is performing it, and then they can make the judgment and all the weight kind of carries on the other person's performance of your piece.
Right.
You're performing it, and so it's like
you're judging everything.
Everything. You did the whole package.
Yep, you're singing, you're guitar playing, you're writing,
your
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so,
did
you have a hurdle in your creative journey?
Yeah, I feel that it came easily at first. I will say, just rolled my way. I was fortunate that way. I feel like I really didn't have to pound the pavement too much, although I did, and that's an old term. And we literally pounded the pavement because we physically had to knock on doors and bring portfolios. But work just sort of streamed in, and then my hurdle came, and that was the advent of the computer and the digital world that completely redefined visual arts and every aspect, I believe. And I think this, Carrie, your work is a good example of where what it can be, how good it can be now. But the transition that I lived through was extremely challenging. It was a huge hurdle. I had to completely redefine myself. I was a master of my trade. I was set, and the people that were my inspiration, the elders that I looked up to, were sitting pretty. They were making multi-digit incomes, and they were successful. And I thought that's where I was going to be, and I was on the road to that, and then it all explodes. Advent of digital, 9/11, our economy sort of redefining itself. But now, I think it has redefined itself, and the arts have found its place, thankfully. Yes, and we can all take a sigh of relief for that. But I think the difficult part of that now is, and I made a list, where we once used to be able to specialize in one area, and then you would hire and you would teamwork, basically. You'd knock on different doors and bring them in as a team to complete different tasks. Now with the computer and the digital world, I made a list of everything I have to do now that I used to have to share with other people. I'm the advertiser, I'm the website builder, I'm the sales rep, I'm the account manager, I'm the estimator, I'm the invoice collector, I'm the concept director, I'm the digital artist, I'm the Photoshop specialist, I'm the type designer, I'm the typewriter, I'm the printer liaison, it'll get something printed, I'm the technical specification specialist, where do all these things have to go on the package, and oh yes, I'm the creator of the artwork itself. And where does that energy come from? After I've done all those other things, I'm overwhelmed daily, right up to present, I will say. It's a lot and it goes fast because the average attention span has now diminished, I think, from 11 seconds to 7 seconds. I think I just saw it read it close. I don't quote so yeah, you got to speak fast and you got to think fast, and poof, if he who hesitates. Anyway, so that's what time would be. My time and energy are my biggest challenges now as I move into more of a fine art phase of my life that I'm just dying to get to, but all this other stuff constantly is there.
I think my hurdles are probably mostly internal. I tend to have, as a lot of artists do,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have a big case of imposter syndrome sometimes. That's they call it imposter syndrome when you sort of, even if you're gaining success and you're getting positive feedback, you have these moments where you're like, I'm a fraud, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not good at this, why did I even think I could take this on? You have these moments where it's like, I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I'm not talented enough. I don't know enough about this. So I think that's kind of a constant thing to have to overcome for me personally, and probably for a lot of you guys too. Just know that even if you're just starting out in some of this stuff, that's very common even throughout your whole career. So don't let it discourage you. You can get past those kind of like mental roadblocks and keep moving forward and keep learning more about your craft and practicing and getting better at it.
I think surrounding yourself with people who really kind of share your vision, even if it's not a specific vision, but are also creators and are bringing things to life on a regular basis, it kind of feeds that fire, and so you kind of both burn a little brighter and have a little more energy to give to the project rather than kind of, being by yourself all the time. I think finding a community of people is really helpful. I know when I got my first commission to write a piece of music for somebody else, and they were like, "We're going to pay you." You're going to pay? Like I do this stuff all the time. Are you sure you should pay me? And then I was like, "No, yes, you should pay me for this." But there's that moment of, and I talked a lot in my thesis about finding my artistic voice, and I think one of the things that I try to do here as an educator is help students find their voice and find the things that they're really good at, because it gives such a huge indication for really the path that they should take, either as a creative artist or really in any sort of aptitude setting. But I know for me, finding my voice, there was this huge disparity, even maybe just in my mind, of being a singer-songwriter, composer, and an educator who maybe studied theory. And so when people asked me what I did, it was always like, yeah, I'm a singer-songwriter. And I'd say it like under my breath, kind of off to the side, because in my mind, there was like this elitist attitude towards, well, if you're not a theorist, if you're studying theory or classical music, then somehow you're not as good as everybody else. And so it took me a really long time to say, yeah, I'm a singer-songwriter and a composer. But the singer-songwriter comes first. And then I consider myself an educator third, even though that's really what I do as a day job. But I think, finding your voice as students, as just human beings, is really important, because whatever you're passionate about in the thing you love most, you can apply to everything that you do.
That little tidbit about feeling worthy of being paid for your work is also very important. Yeah. You are worthy of being paid for your work. Yeah. I can't stress that enough, because people don't want to pay you. They say, you should do it for the exposure, you should do it for the experience. It's a resume builder. Yeah. You need to get to a point where you have to say, this is what I'm doing professionally for a living, and I'm worthy of being paid for it. Yeah. That's really important. That's a roadblock also.
Absolutely.
It's important too.
And being paid fairly. Jeff came in, there you are. So we played a gig at this venue that I won't name, and for 4 hours they paid us $75. And we played like the whole time, and there were hundreds of people that came through, and so they called us back the next year and they said, well, do you want to come and sing? And we said, no, we need more money. And they said, no. And I said, well, I'm not going to, I can go make $13.50 an hour someplace else, or just stay home for 4 hours. So being paid fairly is really getting to the point in your own person where that's not okay. That's not enough for what I'm actually getting.
Not a spaghetti dinner, but money.
No, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Coffee and cookies is
Yeah.
not really enough.
Yesterday, someone asked me to sing at an Arbor Day event in Pittsburgh for 3 hours and said, well, we can't pay you, but we can give you a seedling. A seedling of the Arbor Day tree. And with, children's music and other music. Said, well, I'm not available.
Ever. Unless you give me a forest. Yeah. So what's your favorite project that you've created? What's the project that you are the most proud of to date? Silence.
Well, it's difficult because for me, I guess I would say it would be this book because I put so much effort into it, and I'm fairly proud of the illustrations inside. I say fairly because we always, we artists always want to do better. We always see what we can do better. But I'm very proud of this because not only did these illustrations take a very long time, I thought about them. I did not let any detail go researched, or while I was painting them, in spite of the fact that they are so detailed, I tried to stay in the zone and see little things and not describe every last little thing. Like, even though there's a lot of detail, I left negative space. I tried to make them ethereal. I tried to make them spiritual. This is a spiritual book, and it's not a pushy book, and I won't even talk about my own individual beliefs, but I thought this book was tasteful in the story that it told. Having said that, I don't feel like I've done my favorite project yet, and
We're going to talk about that.
yes. My other favorite project is my creative outlet, all the creative energy I have put into caring for my mother, who now has Alzheimer's. She's 24/7. I've had her for 11 years, and I know that sounds like a digression, but it really isn't, because it has absorbed my whole creative being to try to understand her, make a life for her, believe in what she's still capable of and what she understands. It's taken so much of my creative juices. It's astounding. So I'd say that is right now my favorite project, and I think it's going to end up in my future work, and I'm processing that right now.
Well, my favorite project so far was I put together a slideshow of people from Nicaragua. I went down to Nicaragua with some people from Rochester for 2 weeks, 2 years ago, and we built 3 houses. 12 people. We built 3 houses with the help of masons from FLCC, Nicaragua, where we were, and it was part of a big project that's an ongoing project called 4 Walls. But what I did was I wrote a song in Spanish about the entire experience. And I'm really proud of it because I worked really hard to find the right words and then wrote it completely in Spanish and then made a whole slideshow of the people and the children and the house building, and we really changed the lives of 3 whole families by building, and they're very small, not even as big as this room. Probably a third of this room was as big as the house, and it could have like 8 to 10 people living in the house. And before that, it was just they were more like shacks with tarps and found wood and just like shacks. And suddenly they had 4 walls that were brick and sturdy, and it was just to experience the Nicaraguan people and their incredible generosity to us while we were there. They hardly had anything, and they would daily make us coffee and breads, and so I put together this whole song and wrote the song and then put a slideshow together of the whole thing, and I've shown it in a couple of different places, but it was it's really the closest thing to my heart.
Is that on your YouTube or on your
It is.
website?
It's on my.
or YouTube
It's
page?
on my YouTube channel. Yeah, you can, and it's called Ladrillo a Ladrillo, which means it's a student that was from. He wasn't from Nicaragua, but maybe Guatemala or El Salvador. And he came up to me after the show and he said, "That one guy looked just like my grandfather." I'm not kidding. He was like a spinning image of my grandfather. So I just thought that was really great. I mean, it just made my day. So.
That's so beautiful. I was also going to say I don't think that I've really done my favorite project yet. I've done a lot of diverse things, but my favorite project is always the one that I'm currently working on, and then when I move on to the next one, I always feel like it's better. I've learned more. I've developed my skills further. So every time I finish something new, that ends up kind of becoming my favorite.
So what's your bucket list project? What's like the one project that you absolutely want to make happen, but you haven't yet? It's like the one thing that's like your culminating work. What's your goal for that?
I don't have a goal yet.
No.
I've thought about that question a lot, and I just try to keep my feelers out and see, because I feel like I'm still evolving, so that I don't know. I do know that at some point a goal I have is to be in a play. and just try acting, because I've never been in a play. I've always wanted to be in a play. So that's really the only goal. But it's not like if I'm ever in a play, I'm not going to, be really depressed or anything. So I just don't know. I've been really
To be
trying
decided.
Yeah.
Okay. Elaine, you have.
Well, I thought this would be a good time to bring her. It's just so much fun. There's so much that's said with line and color. But where I think I'm going to go, my bucket list, is to do very large-scale pieces of work. And I know that I'm influenced by what's contemporary right now, but these are the sorts of things I like, and so that you can see how far away. And I actually am working this way now. I didn't bring anything like that, but this is Franz Klein. Actually, I didn't put this the right way, so I think it goes like that, Franz Klein. The abstract expressionist, and then Mark Rothko. The way I see the world now is like this. I don't see it in detail anymore. I see it in shapes. I see it in subtleties. I see it in maybe line or maybe color. When I'm out in the water, I spend a lot of time on the water, and I just see all these things like that, shapes and colors like that. And a friend of mine, this is contemporary work, the husband of my roommate in college. Basically, it's abstract, based in shapes. And this is the kind of thing I would have thought, really, it's not this is not, it's not. But now I totally get it. Like, if I can walk up to something and I'm just like, wow, and you feel things, but you don't know why you feel them. You're just responding and reacting to rhythms, maybe texture, subtle changes, optical illusions, emotion based on very simple information. That's my bucket list. So I got to figure it out. I got work to do.
Okay. Bucket list for me, I think, would be, since I've been exploring kind of the video game audio realm, would be to work on a major AAA title.
So I want to open it up to questions here in just a second, but maybe a last question or two.
Or it's an opportunity to represent women in
Right.
that role.
And then you're visible for somebody else. Somebody
Correct.
else who sees you in that
Right.
role. So that's important too.
That when I was hired at RIT's adjunct, they wanted my skills, but they also made a point to tell me that, well, we really could use a female representative here, which they made a point to say that, and that was, all right, good, I'm up for it. I'll be a person, but I totally get your point. And I know back in basically the early '90s, I found myself maybe not expressing my feminine side or repressing it, trying to, relate with the guys. I was
Gotta be
very
thick-skinned.
conscious of it,
Yeah.
conscious of it, yes.
Yeah.
And putting that out there. But in the art, the visual arts, I'm imagining it might be a little bit different than in your specific field. And I'm not sure, Maria, maybe you're somewhere in the middle. But not only I went to Graphic Careers after Syracuse, and that was woman-owned. The woman who came and hired me, my first job, who came to see what sort of students were there. That's how I got my first job. She was a woman. When I started freelancing, I did a lot of freelance work for a completely women-based ad agency. So I did have a lot of, like I say, all the way through. I was fortunate. Not to say that I didn't also have, a lot of experience with men, and it was fine. I'm just saying that I also did. I did not feel like I was precluded from having a female influence all the way along the way, fortunately.
So I want to open it up to questions from you, from the audience, if you have anything you want to ask them.
I know there's no argument for unequal representation, I agree, but in the audio recording field, would you say that at least some of it is to do with the fact that girls just might not be as interested enough, or do you think it's honestly there's obstacles in their way?
I agree. I definitely think that it's been proven traditionally that in STEM fields, women are not as interested. Some of that might come from, social constructs. When children are young, boys are kind of encouraged to explore, take things apart and figure out how they work. Maybe there's a little bit of bias infused in that still too. Sometimes part of it is that young women don't see other women in those fields that are successful either. So I think that visibility is also an issue too. So I think, yes, I agree with you that maybe there is a part of it is just women just not being as interested in those fields. But I think that there could also be some things that are improved to get more women involved. It may never be 50-50. That's, a given fact. But there definitely could be some improvements made to bring more women in, make them more interested, make them more visible, and make young women see that there can be success in those fields. A lot of different factors.
Can I just add to that? So my niece is 8 and came home with a word search from her music teacher. And there were 32 names on the bottom of the sheet, and every single one of them was composers, and every single one of them was a male. So we are kind of, as a society, teaching our children that men write music. And I actually, the teacher contacted me, and I provided her with a list of 32 names of females and minorities, so that she can make a new word search. It's, because I think kind of innately our society, because, of how the past was, if we only study what happened and we only repeat what happened, then we're only going to have great men composers. There are a ton of female composers. We have to work harder to find them. We have to work harder to change how we teach, so that we're changing the perception of children that it really can be equally represented, right? Paul, you had a question?
Yeah, firstly, thanks for sharing all your stories and everything. I think they're great. So my question is, all the time in America, we hear about funding cuts to the arts programs in, high schools, elementary schools, and early childhood education and stuff like that. So I guess my question is, do you ever see that changing, anticipating that changing? Because we place such a high emphasis on math and science, which is great, but on the reverse side of that, there's so many brilliant minds in math and science that are artists themselves, too. And some of the greatest philosophers and mathematicians of the past were musicians and artists and everything like that themselves. So, and to go off that too, I mean, public schools and private schools, they put a lot of importance on, their sports programs and things like that, but not their musical programs or anything like that. So I was just wondering, do you ever see that changing?
I think you guys have to vote. If you
That's
want
true.
Right.
federal funding, stay with the arts. I mean, research candidates who support that and vote for them. I mean, I think that, it's up to each generation to get involved with that type of thing. You can make a difference in that.
It's really true. It's a really good question because part of the thing about voting was with the education system is the whole core curriculum in education where kids are taught to the test. When even when I was a music teacher, but this is in the public school system back in the 80s, there was still a lot of creative teaching. They weren't teaching to the test, but people were teaching English and math and science would be doing things like word search and creative ways to teach math. But now there's a certain way that they have to teach math in order to the test because that's what allows schools to get the funding so that and they base how much the students know by the test, which is ridiculous because there's so many kids who think creatively and they may not be test takers, and there's so many different intelligences you can gear information towards that kids could learn better, and that would make them maybe seek out a career in the arts. But unless you get the politicians and the people who are making the decisions, it might not change. So that's like the best answer is to make sure you vote, start researching people who are for the education and for the arts, because we don't want them to go away, because that's really the passion of our society, is in the arts.
I think part of it too is, what job is going to get you a paycheck
Well, that's the other thing.
when you're done with school.
Right.
And
It's hard.
Unfortunately, the arts, unless you are, in that rare situation where you're kind of catapulted into some sort of position that maybe you're not really ready for, or you make it big as a singer or whatever, you're really working all of these odd jobs. You have a day job, and then so that you can actually perform and be creative kind of on the side. I think our society is kind of constructed in that way. So I don't know how much art funding is going to happen if it's not a sustainable living, which is unfortunate because I do think I've been here for 9 years and I'm still only part-time and I still only make the same amount of money that I did when I first started, because my quality of life is so much greater than, I could go work a 9-to-5 job Monday through Friday, but my soul would die in the process. And I'm not willing to give that part of it up to have a bigger paycheck, although, I would love, so I tend to work a lot of crazy jobs whenever I can so that I can be sustainable. But I think that's a huge part of it.
So I think it is a voice, having a voice, speaking out, education, educating each other, being educated on how to make it grow, and educating people to realize that so much of our life is a creative endeavor and that they overlap. And therefore, we need to develop that part of ourselves so that we can apply it to doing things like caring for our parents or whatever. So thank you for that question. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for being here. And thank you.